Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
So I noticed on your Twitter feed,
Yes.
You are feeling some Amashamentum.
Well, I've told you before that Amash was one of the only people out there. I got into a debate on Bill Maher a couple weeks ago where everybody feels like you have to vote for somebody. You have to vote for Biden or Trump, let's say. And I'm non-binary, so I don't feel like I have to do that. But I've told you for a long time now that Amash is, if he were to run, one of the few people I would vote for.
And there's been some very, very, loose speculation on his part. I mean, I don't think he's rushing out and stirring the pot a lot, but I have heard him be asked if he would run for president on the Libertarian ticket, and he hasn't said no.
Yeah.
We don't know if he's taken any formal steps towards doing that, actually doing an exploratory committee or anything like that. But because in the past few days he has been openly calling for or saying Trump has committed impeachable offenses, that is starting to make people think maybe he is making a move towards. I mean, he's not endearing himself to the Republican Party. He's attracted a primary challenge in his House district. Why would you do it for yourself if you're just to lose? You might do that if you were looking to move up in some way.
I don't think that Amash is, call me naive, but my reading of him, and by the way, he's read me too. He's read Too Dumb to Fail, which is part of the reason I am such a fan of his. I am a fan of people who like me and like stuff that I write, and that makes me a fan. But my reading of him is that he's not what you would call ambitious or the kind of person who is like strategic. Instead, he's actually very principled, like maybe to a fault. So, look, maybe he runs for president. I hope he does. It would give me someone to vote for this time around.
So you flirted with Tulsi. You flirted with Yang.
But I don't know if I would say I flirted with Tulsi. That's a little, maybe a couple of glances here and there. But
you say if Amash was in, Matt Lewis is in.
Yeah, I will vote for Amash. I think he's
anti-abortion.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's pro-life. Yeah, I think he's probably. Remember, Ron Paul was also a pro-life libertarian. Yeah, I have to look up specifically where he is.
It might make that tricky for him to actually get the libertarian nomination. I assume there are some libertarians in the party that wouldn't want that.
Yeah, the libertarians are divided kind of over that issue, right? But I think he's solid on the life issue. But I guess back to my original point is I don't think we could you can't sort of like look at his movements lately and read the tea leaves and assume that means he's jockeying for position. Like I think he's so principled that he would do things that are actually politically stupid or strategically stupid because he is such a true believer. He prides himself on intellectual honesty and on principle and adherence to the Constitution above all else. I think he puts that actually above his political career, which is why I like him and also why he will never become president, of course.
Now, I've seen a couple of pieces that assume that if he did run for president, this would be bad for Trump, that he would take votes from the right, particularly in his home state of Michigan, which is a swing state, and that would be good for the Democratic nominee. And I don't accept that at all. I think this would be very good for Trump. My sense is that a re-election campaign, it's a referendum on the incumbent, and the way for that incumbent to lose is to have all those who are unhappy with his performance, regardless of where they sit on the ideological spectrum, come together to say, we don't like this guy, whoever the other guy is, great. And so if you now have a choice of a relatively conservative, anti-abortion nominee who is unhappy with Trump, that person might vote for the Democrat in a binary choice because I'm mad at Trump. I'm going to go with the new guy, whoever that person is.
Yeah, especially if it's Biden.
Right.
I mean, if Biden's the nominee and you're a disgruntled Republican, maybe you hold your nose and vote for Joe, unless you have a third option.
Right.
Justin Amash.
So I think anything that splinters the anti-Trump majority, and there's always been an anti-Trump majority. Trump has never, he didn't get 50% in the election. He's never been 50% in the polls. The way he wins.
When he won, and this is one of the things that made me think he wasn't going to win, is that the polling said that like 60% of Republicans, or I forget what it was, some high percent of voters and Republicans thought he was unqualified and lacked the temperament to be president. In my mind, that's a disqualification. Like if you believe someone is unqualified and lacks the temperament to be president, you therefore could not vote for them. I assumed wrongly, because a lot of them did, right, because Hillary was worse. So yeah, you're right about that. Look, I think two things about this. Number one, if Pat Buchanan could inadvertently if people could inadvertently vote for Pat Buchanan instead of Al Gore, like, it's really hard to predict what these variables mean, and like maybe it helps Trump, maybe it hurts Trump. We could game it out. I think you make a plausible argument that it would actually help Trump, but one problem is if Trump does go down, if Trump is defeated, there's going to be a fight on the right over his legacy and trying to rebuild the party. And this will give the Trump supporters the stabbed in the back argument. Okay. Now, look, they're going to have it anyway. They're going to have an argument for how the election was stolen anyway. But I think one argument against someone like Amash running would be it provides an argument that Trump was stabbed in the back by never Trumpers, and that would prevent the party from healing and nominating a good person. Although, guess what? I've run out of good people that I actually like. It's a very small list, and it includes Justin Amash. And, I mean, we saw what happened with Ben Sass, sadly, voting,
Yeah, you have your list of people who didn't side with Trump on his executive order.
There's a few good ones left. There's a few good men and women out there. Mike Gallagher is one of them, but it's a very short list.
But to your stab in the back point, I mean, I agree that if Trump loses, there will be some inter-party discussion about where to go from here, and to say, well, we would have won if people like Justin Amash didn't stab us in the back. I mean, that argument is easily flipped around. You failed to keep the party together. Trumpism was not sufficient to hold a winning coalition. You won in a fluke, and you didn't build on what thin base that you had. So we needed someone who can actually hold the party together.
Yeah, and that's my argument, by the way, when I debate people who insist that you have to vote for Trump or Biden. And my answer is, number one, no, I don't. But number two, we're in a free country. But number two, like, it's up to them to persuade me. Their job is to convince people, including me, to vote for them. And if they can't do it, like, that's on them. So get going. Joe Biden, if you want my vote, let's talk.
So
if you could talk to all 350 million of us.
I would like to circle back to the state of the Republican Party post-Trump, but
yeah,
I want to let's get back to impeachment for a second, because I think impeachment is sort of the hot issue this week.
Well, we got to give the fans what they want, Bill, up front, at the top of the show, where the ratings sag.
Now, I've not written an impeachment piece yet, but I did give two talks. One that was more of a traditional debate format, and one was kind of like a semi-debate format. One in New Haven with John Storr, who has his own newsletter and is a contributing editor to the Washington Monthly. He does a series of political talks called Politics in Plain English at the Institute Library in New Haven. And I also had a meeting here in Northampton with the Indivisible chapter up here. That was more of a formal debate. And so one thing I would say, and I was taking the anti-impeachment argument, not on the constitutional legal merits, but on the political merits. That wasn't a good political strategy for Democrats. And one thing that my sense is from both of these experiences, because I'm talking to liberal audiences in both places, is that there's a lot of conflicted feelings on the left. I mean, these are all people who there's definitely in their heart of hearts they want to impeach, but their heads are saying maybe it's not the right way to go. And I kind of mixed it up on Twitter yesterday on this subject, and I was getting a lot more adamant, give no quarter pro impeachment arguments on Twitter, whereas when I'm actually talking to human beings in a room, you get a much more nuanced sense of where the left is at. And this is the kind of thing that polling doesn't give you. Polling makes everything very binary. You're in this camp or that camp. And my personal interactions suggest there's a lot of mixed feelings and a lot of uncertainty on the left about where to go. But just to give my argument on this, and this ties into the question about divide the anti-Trump majority. My sense is the only way Trump wins is if the anti-Trump majority splinters. Now, I think almost everybody will accept, not quite, that if the House impeaches, Trump does not get convicted in the Senate. You need 20 Republicans to join a unified Democratic Party to actually convict and oust Trump. I mean, in one of my debates, there's people will give the never say never. In Watergate, the polls showed that Nixon had support. It didn't tip till the very end. You never know what shoe's going to drop. Things could still happen. Fine, things could happen. There is some theoretical scenario where
wouldn't that have been the Mueller? I mean, wouldn't that have been the Mueller report? We spent 2 years. I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm spouting Donald Trump's talking points here, but we did spend a couple years on the Mueller report, and
I think a lot of shoes have dropped. There's a lot that is known. There's a lot that have shocked the senses.
I would have impeached Trump day one. I mean, I'm not like.
But you didn't vote for Trump in the first place. You're not a Trump voter. What would move Trump voters into the impeachment camp and give Senate Republicans the political ground? They say, I can do this and not lose my job. I don't know what that shoe is. I don't know.
If that was going to happen, it probably would have happened with the Mueller report.
I think it's a fairly safe argument that you're not going to convict Trump in the Senate. And and most pro-impeachment voices I know then shift to, well, it's not about that. It's about having the vote. It's about standing up for the rule of law, being counted, and exposing Trump to the public, showing you where Democrats stand and Republicans stand.
All right, let me jump in real quick, Bill, because I think it's very, and you've laid this out perfectly, and I think it's very easy for people like you and me to scoff at that. And because we would say, look, don't get mad, don't get even, get ahead. Trump wants to be impeached. He's not normal. He's not going to be embarrassed by being impeached. He wants to be impeached. And so you're going to go through this whole exercise for a principle to make yourself feel good and to get it on the record that he was impeached, and it's actually could cost you the election. So it's easy for people like you and me to scoff at that. I will say, though, going back to Bill Clinton, I remember how I felt. And if the Republican Party had decided for strategic reasons it was shrewder not to impeach Bill Clinton, I would have probably been outraged. And I think a lot of people would have been outraged. And we wanted to get it on the – even if you had said to me, the Senate's not going to convict, I would have been like, doesn't matter. We need – he has, perjured himself. We need to, because out of honor or principle, we need to get this on the record. And so I would try to be a little sympathetic to the people who are making this argument.
Well, I mean, if you believe, and most people do, by the way, believe that Trump has committed crimes, it's not illogical to say he's committed crimes, there's evidence he's committed crimes. You can't just sit there silent while a criminal is in the Oval Office. You have an obligation to get him out. Now, I think the problem with that is you're not going to get him out. You're not going to, there's a 99.99% chance you're not going to get him out through the impeachment process. And therefore, it's not about upholding the rule of law, because the Senate's not going to allow you to do that through the impeachment process.
Right.
It becomes a political matter. What is the best way to get Trump out of office on Election Day? And if impeachment does not help you accomplish that, you are not upholding the rule of law. You are just getting something off of your personal chest.
But what if your base, and this may be a real dilemma, like almost a catch-22 for Democrats and Pelosi. I don't know how intense the base is, but what if impeaching is a stupid idea that makes it less likely you'll defeat Donald Trump in the 2020 elections and zero chance of actually removing him from office via impeachment, and yet if you don't do it, your base will be outraged and or apathetic, that they will actually...
Well, this is where my argument comes in is, I mean, I can grant that I'm not clairvoyant. Polls are not static. It is possible you could have an impeachment inquiry and things are revealed in that process that move the needle in some way politically, even if it doesn't change Republicans, that it moves swing voters and it increases the intensity of opposition for Trump. Sure, that could happen.
Well, there's also an argument that it gives you standing. That, in other words, if you are a congressional committee trying to subpoena Trump's tax records, trying to force McGahn to testify or whatever, you have that the courts might delay, they might not rule on this or whatever, but if you're open impeachment proceedings, that will give you more standing, and that the courts...
What's a legal strategy question? Let's circle back there for a second. I want to finish the political point.
All right.
So I can't say with certainty where the political winds will go after an impeachment inquiry begins or an actual impeachment is taken, but also neither do you know that's going to go in your direction. It is an uncertain question. I would argue what evidence we do have, as of today, the American public is against impeachment, even though the majority believes Trump committed crimes. And, you know, someone showed me a blog post by Will Wheaton saying this is different than the 90s because the American people know Trump's committed crimes. Actually,
Will Wheaton, is this the guy from Star Trek?
I think, yeah, he's always been a very big, blog presence. In the Clinton impeachment, there even bigger numbers said Clinton committed perjury. It was over 70% said Clinton committed perjury. It was a slight majority that Clinton committed obstruction of justice, but still huge numbers saying don't impeach, don't remove. So it's actually fairly similar to the situation now, whereas Quinnipiac was like 57% said Trump committed crimes before he was president, yet it was over 60% saying don't impeach. So we know there's a middle of the country as of today that says, I think Trump's a criminal, don't impeach. We also know from 2018 that the people that won in the swing districts and the Trump won districts, they did not run on a Trump's a criminal message. They did not run on impeachment. They generally didn't mention Trump's name and focused on Washington dysfunction. Republicans want to take away your health care. They give tax breaks to corporations. It was not about holding Trump accountable. And I feel like there's a Tom Steyer need to impeach video that says you were elected to hold Trump accountable. That's actually not true. There's actually evidence that that's not the basis on which they were elected. So you don't have strong evidence to suggest the political winds are going to shift your way. So at minimum, it's a bet. It's a blind bet that doing so will help you politically. And since the way Trump wins is by a divided anti-Trump majority, I would argue there is more evidence that impeachment further divides than unifies. So if I'm making a choice, like, what's the best way to go at this guy? To my mind, the pros and cons don't line up for impeachment. Now, what you were saying about the legal question, there is an argument that if you're jousting with Trump over whether they have to respond to subpoenas, there is an argument that if you're in the middle of an impeachment inquiry, you can go to the court and say, look, we have a formal impeachment inquiry going on here. The only way we can actually do our jobs is if he's forced to comply with the subpoena. Jeffrey Toobin on CNN just was saying, because the Democrats have won 2 court cases about...
My colleague.
Yeah, your
my colleague
CNN colleague. They're going 2 court cases, one this week, saying Trump has to comply with subpoenas, even though there is not an impeachment inquiry. So he was arguing this strengthens Pelosi's hand, saying, look, we can investigate, we can do oversight, we can hold him accountable, we can show the public what he's doing without having an impeachment inquiry or an actual impeachment vote. The courts are going to side with us. So, I also hear from folks, an impeachment inquiry is not impeachment. We should be investigating. But to your point about betrayal and the left being upset if they don't do this, I would argue the quicker you can put the impeachment question to bed and move on to something else, the less it's top of mind, the less it's an agitating factor. If you have an impeachment inquiry on the grounds that, well, let's just see where this goes, let's just see what we find out. If Democrats said, we had the inquiry and you know what? We just couldn't find enough information to have an impeachment vote or to vote for impeachment. Then the betrayal would be off the charts.
That's like a campaign exploratory committee.
Yeah.
Like it never discovers that you shouldn't run.
Right.
It just doesn't happen.
So I think that's why Pelosi is leaning so hard into trying to poo-poo this, because she doesn't want this to be a top-of-mind issue that is continually causing intra-party division, because that would also be bad as far as unifying the Democratic Party and unifying the country.
Well, it is funny because I really think, and this is not original to me, but it still surprises me to hear it come out of my mouth, but I really think Trump really wants to be impeached. He actually wants them to impeach him.
Well, it's possible.
He's egging them on.
I mean, I think there are Democrats that think that that's phony body language. That's just bluster, and he really, if he really wanted it, then he would release the Mueller report and comply with the subpoenas and just let the chips fall where they may. But
he doesn't want. I mean, he wants to force them to play a bad hand. He doesn't want to give away the game.
I to my mind, like trying to read Trump's mind is not useful. Who knows? I do know that in Congress, Republicans are very unified, with the lone exception of Justin Amash, to stand with Trump in the face of impeachment, whereas Democrats are in the middle of fighting with each other over impeachment. So here is something that, at least as of today, impeachment is dividing Democrats and unifying Republicans, which is exactly what you don't want to be come election time. So what I'd like to see, I'd like to see lots of oversight and investigation about what Trump is doing in office now. How is he actually governing? What's happening in HUD? What's happening in EPA? What's happening in Interior? We've got some dribs and drabs, but Democrats really haven't trained their firepower on that. I mean, what happens in a situation where there's an actual impeachment and an actual trial? If McConnell even had a trial, which I think is also unlikely. McConnell probably wouldn't even have the trial. But
he's focused on raising the smoking age bill to 21, a very important issue, and I think you've probably not given enough to.
What's the Republican message? What's the Trump message in the face of impeachment? If he is to be disciplined about it, which arguably he can't be. But the argument would be, we have gotten this economy on the right track. The economy is booming, and the Democrats don't want you to know about that. They want to distract you with impeachment. That's the best argument Trump has. Is that the economy?
It's not a bad argument. It's not a bad argument. So there's actually truth to it, to be honest with you. When's the last time? And look, I think you could also argue that Trump has stepped on his good economy by looking guilty and by doing sketchy things. Sure. But regardless, I don't know the last time. I mean, you don't see a lot of cable news segments about the good economy.
What I think Democrats should be doing is laying the groundwork for an argument that what Trump does, what he has done as president on a day-to-day basis, is about enriching himself, enriching his friends, playing to his base, but not working for you. And with oversight that shows that the day-to-day inner workings of the executive branch are not being geared toward the enrichment of the public. That's a way of saying, this was a Biden line the other day, you inherited a good economy that the Obama-Biden administration gave to you, and you have frittered away and wasted time to try to enrich yourself and your friends. Instead of making the economy even better for the average working person.
Biden's doing great, and he's not really focused on impeaching Trump, is he? But I think he did
make a comment last month that if Trump doesn't comply with congressional requests, the House would be left with no other constitutional choice. So he has certainly cracked the door open to being for. He hasn't gone as far as Warren has. And Bernie just yesterday, I mean, he is someone who was more openly fretting about the policy of impeachment, that Trump would encourage that. He then said yesterday, the House may have no choice here. So, particularly for Biden, here's someone where what weakness he has is on the left flank. That might be a way to be, they really have no other recourse here.
Yeah.
I mean, he may not lean into it the way a Warren would, but he might nod towards it as a way to say, you know what, I'm with you that Trump. I mean, his argument is that Trump is an aberration and it needs to be removed. That doesn't conflict with his overarching message.
Well, speaking of an aberration, I mean, there's a theory, this historian Andrew Roberts, who's written about Churchill and others and Napoleon, and he has like a list of like what makes these great leaders. He's not a Trump fan by any stretch, but he has these lists of things that make a great leader. And one of them is he lucky? And Trump is incredibly lucky. And I tell you, I thought of this.
It was the one time.
Well, I've thought of this just the other. It only takes one time. Right. Just the other day when what's his name? The Stormy Dan, Michael Avenatti.
Yeah.
Like, there's a guy who had the same bluster, moxie, audacity, and it seems like it caught up to him, Whereas Trump, he has like pushed so many, like he has tested every single like norm and really surprised me by how weak some of these guardrails were that he could push over pretty easily. He has such moxie and such audacity that it's really amazing. And unlike Avenatti, it seems like it caught up to him, he just keeps getting away with it.
Well, I mean, it very well might catch up to Trump come the next election.
It could.
There's not a lot of evidence that he's in a great political place for 2020.
But he always, again, who knows? But it just seems like just when you think you've got him. I remember when I was a kid, I used to be a Redskins fan until about 2 years ago. And we would play against Joe Montana, back, I'm aging myself here, but he was the 49ers quarterback. And we'd be chasing him, and you're just about to sack Montana. And just as you're tackling him, he would throw the ball to Jerry Rice or somebody for a touchdown. And it was like, he's just like so elusive. It's amazing.
Well, let's shift gears back to the Democrats in 2020 here. Biden is still holding his front-runner position, largely on the grounds that he's the most electable. And you're seeing the other candidates trying to poke holes in that premise that you shouldn't assume just because he's a white guy and he claims he can talk to the white working class in the Rust Belt, that might not hold up over time. You need to account for the possibility that the nominee should be someone who can really rouse the base, energize the youth, energize people of color, and there's plenty of elements of Biden's track record that are not conducive to that. And I don't think that is an inherently illegitimate argument. I mean, I think whoever's prosecuting that argument needs to make the case that they will have some unique capabilities to energize the base, which I think is hard to do when you're not performing well in the primary and you're not performing as well as Biden in the trial heats with Trump. But as it stands, not only does Biden do the best in almost every trial heat poll that we've seen, he also has been getting under Trump's skin more than any other candidate. I mean, we talked about Warren in a past show, and the thing that Warren is definitely on the rise. She is, gutting it out and potentially establish herself as the primary anti-Biden alternative, and she might even be in the verge of eclipsing Bernie in this respect. But she's still limited in her growth because there are people who said, you know what, you went up against Trump over the Pocahontas stuff and you did not win. You did not win that exchange. That makes me concerned about your ability to go toe-to-toe with him. Trump keeps trying to go after Biden and flailing and missing the mark. You know, having this insane 60 retweet storm about firefighters and unions that made him look unhinged. And then he accuses Biden at a Pennsylvania rally, he abandoned you. And then Biden gets to shoot back like, yeah, my dad lost his job and he had to move out of state and it was crushing for our family. And this is why I understand the trials and tribulations of working people in Pennsylvania. Like Trump clearly does not have Biden's number at this point.
That's vital. And I think it's worth spending a minute on why that is. And some of it could be that certain people are just cool and unflappable, and certain people can have their feathers ruffled more easily. And maybe Biden's just a cool guy who is you just can't mess with him. I mean, look, I think about this as being almost like an elementary or high school type thing. You know, when you go to school, you look around a classroom and you're like, okay, that guy's a victim. I can pick on that guy and take his lunch money, and I'm not going to mess with that guy. Oh, and that guy's funny, so we'll be okay. He's cool too. You know, we size people up. And if you think of this presidential field, there's like 22 of them, and it's pretty much like a class. You know, there's some people in the classroom are cool, and Joe Biden with his aviator sunglasses there's just something about him. And if you're going against a bully like Trump, you need someone who is unflappable. Like, that might be it. I think some of it, too, could just be also Biden has earned the gravitas, because having been through what he's been through personally as well as professionally, he's comfortable in his own skin. And then also, I think it's hard to tear him down. His name ID is so high. The public has already made up their mind. He makes gaffes, but we've dealt with that already. Like, we're not surprised. And so, I mean, for all these reasons, I think Biden is much, much more prepared to handle Trump's taunts than let's say Elizabeth Warren, who I think would be a disaster going up against Trump.
Well, I think the thing that drives Trump insane about Biden is Biden threatens his bond with the white working class. Trump has been going forward on the premise these are my people.
Yeah.
And they're with me, thick or thin. And now here comes a guy who is laying a claim to that constituency, not illegitimately. I mean, not that he would own the entire white working class, but clearly could take a piece of it. And this definitely rattles Trump. I mean, if I was Trump and I was going after Biden, I might try to troll the left and be talking about the 94 crime bill and talking about busing and see if you can exacerbate divides within the Democratic Party. But the notion that Biden will take away Trump's standing with his favorite people, the people that make Trump not seem like a New York City billionaire, but by assault of the earth.
And remember, Biden doesn't have to take that many of them away.
Right.
Trump lost 3 states by 80,000 votes, right?
70,000.
Okay, 70,000 votes. So if Biden just does a little better than Hillary,
right?
And of course he's going to do a little better. I mean, it would stand to reason that he'll do a little better. That Joe Biden is going to play better.
Unless there's a bleed on the left. I mean, that's the risk that Biden has.
Yeah, that's the rub, right? That's the rub. But again, I mean, was Hillary Clinton a great champion of the left either?
Well, I mean, she arguably lost because she wasn't going to get the white working class, and she couldn't juice the base too, so she loses it on both ends.
I think Biden's better on both ends.
Potentially. I mean, and so trial heat polls would suggest that his lead over Trump is significant enough and in enough states that he could afford a little bleed and still do all right.
Yeah. They could do a lot worse than Biden. I tell you what scares me about Biden is and I heard Joe Trippi talking about this a while ago, but if you go, and if you look at what Democrats did in '84, they were worried about Reagan, so they play it safe, and they nominate Mondale. 2004, they're worried about Bush. They hate Bush. There's Bush derangement syndrome. Got to get rid of Bush. Howard Dean's too extreme. Let's play it safe. We'll go with John Kerry. There is the pattern that if you're going to play it safe, Biden's the play it safe candidate. Now, I think I would argue that Biden has more panache than Kerry or Mondale. But it does seem to be a pattern of Democrats in these re-elections against an incumbent Republican going with the play it safe candidate. And there's nothing more dangerous than playing it safe. It doesn't work.
That's definitely those who are trying to undercut Biden's electability argument. That's an argument that they make.
Yeah.
I think a counter to that is, what's the argument that a different candidate would have won in '84 or '88 or 2004? These are all years where the economy was growing for the incumbent party. In the case of 2004, we weren't at a point where opposition to the war was as strong as it was in 2006. Bush still had the national security edge over any Democrat. Democrats were still seen as softer on national security. That really didn't tip over until Iraq really went off the rails during the second term. So what's the argument that Howard Dean or Jesse Jackson would have done any better in those contests? So in this case, you have a guy who is not just a bland, cookie-cutter, generic Democrat. You have a guy who has personality, has a base of support, has actual fans, was a popular... Mondale wasn't a popular VP. He was a VP for an unpopular president who got kicked out of office. Biden's a VP for a very popular president who left on a high note. I'm not saying that Biden's a lock, whether there aren't arguments to be made. I think these sorts of arguments are not the strongest arguments to make against him.
Look, nobody cares what I think about the Democratic primary because I'm not a liberal, and they might see it as like, I don't know, not virtue signaling, but like virtue. What is it called? Something trolling? I've forgotten my lingo, Bill.
Concern trolling.
Thank you. That was on the tip of my tongue for years because I used to be accused of being a concern troll on the right. But for what it's worth, I really think, it seems like Biden's like the best bet Democrats have, right? I mean, it really seems pretty clear. And I think the voters seem to concur with that.
Well, there's one other point I want to make about Biden. This is actually, I don't know if I talked about it last week. I had a piece in Politico last week. Did the left misread the 2020 primary, misread the 2020 Democratic electorate? And there's one tidbit I had that didn't stay in the piece. I had talked to the political scientist Rachel Bidikofer, and she was generally agreeing with my point that the left was wrongly assuming that the electorate was more progressive than it is, and they're not accounting for the sheer terror of the Democratic electorate, which makes them very risk-averse and wants them to gravitate towards the safer choice. But she did say the left is right that a more liberal platform, a more aspirational platform, is better than a sort of cold, pragmatic, technocratic platform. Ask Hillary Clinton. And where I think Biden complicates that dichotomy, Biden is a pragmatist. He is a bipartisan. He is definitely pushing against some of the more maximalist proposals like Medicare for all. But his argument for bipartisan pragmatism is wrapped in a lot of aspirational rhetoric. National unity, healing, let's come together as Americans. And that strikes a chord with some people. I mean, for someone on the left, it's infuriating. It's naive.
The only other guy doing it's Pete Buttigieg.
Right,
and they've got that lane pretty much. Everybody else is negative. Let's fight. And that's fine. That could be part of your message. But I think the only people who are have the hope and change message are Biden.
But Buttigieg, I think, muddies it because he's also for let's get rid of the filibuster. Let's expand the court. Let's get rid of the electoral college. He is trying to play the norm busting lane and the let's reach out to Fox News viewers lane. Biden is, I think, clearer and more consistent on we can only function as a country through a working consensus, and I'm the guy who has actually done this before. I know how to make government work. I was in the Obama administration making those deals with Republicans. That's how the Recovery Act happened, and therefore I know how to do this again. Now, and there's people on the left saying that's insane, that McConnell's even worse than before. You're not even going to have... You're not going to just need one or two Republicans. You're going to need like 10 or 15 Republicans. That's never going to happen. Of course, by that same token, how is it? Are you getting single payer and a wealth tax and a Green New Deal in those circumstances either? The argument that, well, I just have to eliminate the filibuster, well, that accounts for having a majority. You might even have a majority. And if you have a majority, it might be a very thin majority. You might not have 51 votes for eliminating the filibuster. So I think those arguments are very complicated on both sides. But my point is that Biden is not ceding the mantle of aspiration and inspiration, which I think is going to drive the left further insane because they thought they had a lock on that argument, that they were the ones being inspiring, and Biden's being inspiring just in a totally different direction. Yeah. Which
I'm curious to see if Biden can win the mom vote, my mom's vote.
Have you talked to her about it?
No, not yet. She's in Pennsylvania. She doesn't like Trump. Now, all of her sisters love Trump. And I suspect what will happen as the campaign goes on, assuming it's Biden versus Trump, that she gets pushed. I assume she gets pushed to Trump, but Biden would. I think there's a way that Trump could run to win her vote. I'm sorry. There's a way Biden could run that would win her vote, but I doubt if the universe will allow that to happen.
Now, has she always voted Republican?
Yeah, as far as I know. I know she liked. I'd have to ask her if she voted for Carter. She liked Jimmy Carter. But I think she probably still voted for Reagan in 80. I'm not sure. She might have voted for Carter. But ever since then, she's definitely voted Republican in every election.
She's very socially conservative.
Yeah, I mean, I would say more like even just culturally conservative. But
Carter got more of those votes in 76 than lost them in 80.
Yeah. So, but again, she doesn't like Trump.
She does. As of today, she does not like Trump.
She doesn't like Trump. No, she doesn't like Trump. But again, she will see it as a binary choice. She's not going to not vote. She'll definitely vote. So it's a question of, and I think Biden could have a chance, but it's going to be.
I mean, she does not seem like the lowest hanging fruit for any Democrat.
She'd be I mean, it would be like if there's a reordering taking place kind of thing, which happens, and we're due for one. I just had a podcast about it the other day. That I could see if Biden were hitting all the right notes, it could, if the stars aligned, he could win her vote. For what that's worth.
This should be a regular feature of your podcast.
We can check in, yeah.
You should have a Matt Mama meter.
The mama
what are your chances of voting for a Democrat, voting for Biden or whoever?
Yeah. It'll be interesting. I suspect that she's kind of where I'm at, and that she can't bring herself to vote for a Democrat just because of say the life issue and what judges they'll appoint.
Right.
But whereas I can't bring myself to vote for Trump either. My guess is that she would, but I don't know.
Maybe you can get her on the Amash bandwagon.
Actually, I mean, if Justin Amash did run, I would really try to get her to vote for Amash. I really would, and I would actually try to get people I know to vote for him. But that's and I really I think the best person running right now is Andrew Yang. I think he's the guy that I'd want to
But he's pro-choice. I assume he's pro-choice.
Yeah, he's a I mean, see, that's the problem. He's a Democrat, and if you're a Democrat, you're not allowed to be pro-life.
Unless you're, well, John Bel Edwards in Louisiana.
Okay, at the national level.
Dan Lipinski is still in the House.
Well, who's that?
Dan Lipinski in Illinois, still in the House.
One guy, okay. Well, you get my point.
Yeah, we have a Democratic governor in Louisiana. I think he has signed a very strict anti-abortion bill, and you have a Republican governor in Vermont signing a very ambitious pro-choice bill.
These are throwbacks to the way the parties used to be. I mean, these are very rare examples now, but once upon a time, that would have been a pretty common thing.
Yes. And I'm curious how Biden handles this if he was the nominee, because his anti-abortion record as a younger senator is, he spoke out against Roe. He even supported legislation that would support, ending Roe and returning things to the states. Never been for. I think he has flip-flopped on this now, but I think he was against federal funding for abortions.
Al Gore was pro-life. Right. Jesse Jackson was pro-life.
Right. But Biden, I think, hung on to elements of that record for a fairly long time, and really only as vice president has he really more fully come around. So the question is, I mean, not that he's going to become an abortion moderate. I think his positions are going to be squarely pro-choice in the primary and as the nominee. But what rhetoric does he use? Does he use any kind of rhetoric as the general election nominee that's designed to say, hey, if you're anti-abortion, that's cool. We still could use your vote. We still want to deliver you health care. We still want you to be able to send your kids to college, et cetera, et cetera.
I mean, dude, that matters. I have to tell you. There was one brief moment where I thought about voting for Hillary Clinton. Mm-hmm. And it was right after the Access Hollywood video came out. And there was a debate 24 hours later. And Hillary Clinton is asked about nominating someone from the Supreme Court. What are you going to do? And instead of saying, like, I'm going to pick someone who's going to be experienced and qualified and will interpret the Constitution, she was like, the number one thing I'm going to do is pick someone who will uphold Roe versus Wade and someone who is going to stand up for women who want to abort their children. I mean, I'm paraphrasing here, but that was what I heard. And I'm like, okay, well, that was short-lived.
Well, the thing I think that what I would say to anyone who is anti-abortion is, even in your wildest dreams that Roe v. Wade got overturned, it's never going to be illegal coast to coast. There's always going to be abortion in America. And if you create a situation where it's on a state-by-state basis, you're just going to have people raising money to ferry people over state lines to get abortions. So you're going to intensify that debate by ending Roe v. Wade. You could be partnering with Democrats on how to reduce abortions. There's plenty of support amongst Democrats to have comprehensive sex ed and contraception and all sorts of things. With the desire to reducing unwanted pregnancies and reducing the need for abortion, you might actually get more statistical gain with cooperation than by fighting this in the courts.
Charlie Camosi, who is on the board of Dems for Life, has a new book out called, what is it called? It's called Resisting Throwaway Culture. And in the book, he argues that Obamacare is probably the biggest contributor to decreased abortions. Like, if you look at the statistics and the decline of the abortion rate, that Obamacare, and I guess I have to go back and look at it. I think it's because it funds childhood or parental, I don't know. But he believes that Obamacare actually is the biggest thing that has decreased abortion. So,
this is my parallel to my impeachment argument. You're not going to impeach and convict Trump. It's not going to happen. make decisions that are going to get you closest to your goal, which is to get Trump out of office at a later date, be January 20th, 2020.
Well, this is...
If you're an anti-abortion, you're not going to end abortion coast to coast. It is not going to happen. Make decisions that are going to help you reduce the number of abortions as much as possible, which I would argue would require bipartisan cooperation.
Okay, but using that analogy, I wouldn't even say torn, but I have two different sort of data points. Like, on one hand, I'm like the progressive voter who wants to stand on principle and get it on the record. So I do believe it's important to be on the record. Just again, just like I would be an abolitionist, I hope that I would get it on the record where I am, and that a country should be on the record of being on the right side of this issue. So I identify with the people who are doing things that are principled, even if it's not expedient. But on the other hand, I'll tell you here's where I do agree with kind of where you're getting at, which is the just get ahead philosophy is, this is why I'm against like what's happening in Mississippi, right? Where they're trying to...
Alabama, I think.
Alabama.
I think the same Mississippi too, but the one that passed Alabama was this flat abortion ban, no rape, incest exceptions.
Right. So, like, for example, I think we should keep the exception for rape, and I understand why people. So, like, if you're a pro-lifer who believes that that all human life is precious and that life begins at conception, it's utterly inconsistent to support exceptions, right? Because if it's life, how could you support? But my theory is public policy is messy, and sadly, you have to make compromises and trade-offs, right, for the kind of the better good. And I would argue that the people who are trying to push for no exceptions are actually doing harm for those of us who want to persuade and create a culture of life and get people to just choose not to have abortions based on their choice, right? It's actually a pro-choice thing. You choose life, as George Michael famously said in that T-shirt. So anyway, I don't want to get bogged down in abortion, but it's funny how it does kind of parallel the same argument over impeachment.
To what extent is the conservative movement being roiled by what's happening in Alabama? Is there intra-movement debate over whether this is the right strategy?
Well, okay, so it's funny, right? You just said we're talking about impeachment, and you said that like Republicans are united and Democrats are divided. Now we have a situation where Republicans are divided. When I was on Bill Maher, I said, and this is before all these bills started dropping, and I said I think 99% of mainstream pro-lifers are okay with these exceptions, and I think I was obviously wrong by saying 99% because clearly there is a divide over this question, and I don't think it's boiled over to the point where there's a huge fight on the right over this. But look, when we were talking about Hermit Gosnell, we were united. When we were talking about Ralph Northam and basically aborting a live baby, we were agreed and we were united. Now we're not united, and you could say that it's just about strategy or tactics, but the pro-life movement is now divided, and so that's probably not a great thing.
I just want, just so we don't have a loose end, we talked earlier on about how the Republican Party might engage in some soul searching upon a Trump loss, and how an Amash candidacy might factor into that. We also talked about the whole Biden bipartisanship argument. One of the things that sort of drove the left up the wall was that Biden saying if Trump lost, there'd be an epiphany amongst Republicans, some Republicans at least, and therefore it'd be easier to work with them. And people left saying that's insane. How can you possibly believe that? How have you not been paying attention to Mitch McConnell? And I think that because we don't know exactly how that inter-party discussion is going to go, if Trump loses, there's going to be some sort of inter-party debate. Did 4 years of Trumpism work out well for us or not. And I don't know if I'd say with the same level of certainty of Biden saying that there would be an epiphany. I mean, I think even Biden dialed it back soon after, and he wasn't making a flat prediction. But I think there's certainly a possibility that some folks are going to shake out of their stupor and say, you know what, that did not work. That was not conducive to our party growth. And I'm sure Mitch McConnell is not all that inclined to be conciliatory. And if he was the majority leader, that would certainly, if he was going to dig in his heels, that would give Democrats a lot of problems, whoever was the president. But if Democrats get a slight majority in the Senate, are there going to be enough Republicans who say, this is a dead-end path for our party? And if a President Biden or whoever is going to put something on the table that is somewhat reasonable, and I can at least open the door to something that can deliver to my constituents in my state, that's going to make our party look good in the end. And who cares what McConnell has to say? Or even if there's enough people, if McConnell was the majority leader, if there were enough senators saying, I'm going to lose my next election if I'm seen as an obstructionist because people are so mad about what just went on and they're craving for cooperation, I need you to put this thing on the floor. Maybe he would budge. I'm not saying I'm optimistic about that scenario, but I don't think we should assume just because there was a lot of obstruction before predicts what's going to happen in the future, because we don't know what kind of jarring effect a Trump loss is going to have in the Republican Party.
Yeah, if Trump loses, it's going to be amazing, and it will be like an identity crisis, and I don't know what's going to happen. I'm actually less interested in the immediate response. I think Republicans would go back to the Obama playbook, obstruction. I think that's pretty obvious. But the question I would have is, who wins the 2024 nomination, and what and how do people run? Like, do you run as a populist? Do you run as a nationalist? Do you try to run like it's 2008, again? Do you think you can go back? Do you double down on the working class white thing? I mean, it's up in the air. What if Republicans lose Texas?
Right.
I mean, so it depends on what the loss looks like.
Yeah.
How narrow is the loss?
Yeah.
And what states do you lose? I think it's possible that I wouldn't bet on it, but I think it's within the realm of possibility Republicans lose like Arizona and Texas. And then it doesn't matter what else happens.
I mean, one thing I think people forget is after the 2012 loss, Republicans were pretty rattled. Even Sean Hannity was talking about immigration reform. Romney blew it. I'm talking about self-deportation. We lost the Latino vote, and we got to get this issue behind us. And one of the great tragedies of the Obama presidency, in my opinion, is a month after the re-election victory was Sandy Hook. And guns was a subject that Obama had generally avoided. There were a number of tragic mass shootings in his first term. It did not compel him or anyone else in the party to push for gun control because they, I think, correctly concluded that was not going to be a winning issue for them in key states. And after Sandy Hook, you're on the second term. That was particularly traumatic and horrific. Understandable conclusion, we can't just do nothing here. We have to do something. And so gun control got put ahead of immigration reform. And so where there was a moment where Republicans were unsteady on immigration reform, and if you move fast, you might be able to take advantage of it. Instead, you went down the gun control path, which the NRA was there to steal Republicans and resist whatever, no matter how modest the proposal was, they were going to resist. And you lost the momentum in immigration reform, and by the time they came around, you still got through the Senate. You still got Lindsey Graham and John McCain and Marco Rubio, but enough conservatives got their bearings back, including Sean Hannity, who snapped back, and to steal the House Republicans.
And I have to say, I know there might be some conservatives listening to this, and they're hearing this, and they're thinking Republicans would have gotten rolled. What Bill's saying is, if Obama had acted quickly, Republicans would have got rolled. I actually think I supported immigration reform, and I actually think it would have been a good thing. And a lot of what Trump is trying to do with border security was in the immigration reform bill. So I mean,
you can make the argument that, Republicans held firm and won the presidency on the basis of antipathy towards immigration reform. But if it's a brief victory that only lasts for one term, and you lose big in 2020, it's not much of a victory. So, again, I can't predict exactly where these discussions are going to go. My only point is it's not ludicrous to envision a scenario where Republicans are forced to rethink their posture, particularly in the immediate aftermath of a significant loss.
And look, I'm going to be self-indulgent here because this probably isn't advancing the discussion, but I just want to go on record and say we should not discount how people like Ted Cruz and organizations like the Heritage Foundation dramatically contributed to demagoguing the immigration reform issue and spreading misinformation about it and playing politics and hurting in order to hurt Rubio in many cases. And the consequences that ultimately led to. Now, I think it's incredible irony, of course, that Donald Trump ended up stopping Ted Cruz from winning the Republican nomination. But I have not forgotten how that all played out. And there were plenty of like obvious bad actors, like Breitbart.com that were involved, but that they did what they did. Like they did what you would expect them to do. But groups like Heritage Action, really sad what happened there.
We've gone on for a solid hour, so we should probably wrap it up. Anything you want to plug?
We're doing great, man, with the podcast. I talked about Charlie Camosi, who has that book out about resisting throwaway culture. I had him on the podcast. Michael Malice has a book out about the new right. And I have a video podcast about to drop. So it'll be on YouTube and iTunes and Stitcher and Google Play with Bridget Fetisi. Bill, do you know Bridget Fetisi? Do you know who she is?
I do not.
So this is a former, she was a sex columnist for Playboy, and she has turned into, she now writes at different places, including The Federalist, and she's kind of like a liberal Democrat who the party left her, and so now she's, I don't think I'd call her a conservative, but she's definitely someone who talks about politics and has an interesting perspective. So I'm hoping that's going to drop in the next day or two.
All right, very exciting.
How about you?
I got nothing. If you haven't seen my piece from last week in Politico, I did the left misread the 2020 primary electorate. Check that out. And I should have a Real Clear Politics column coming out on Monday, but topic TBD.
All right. Well, keep us posted, and we'll see you back here in the DMZ next week.
Take care.